Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants, and thank you for my colleagues that have just presented here. It really helped frame the whole session, and I will sort of then explain my presentation here. Next slide, please. As I was thinking through this in terms of the interconnections with water and food, this is something that in my institute and in my career, this is certainly the part of the water sector I've emphasized most on, and really how to bring this into this discussion at this level. And what I wanted to say, just do is a broad brush framing of the water and food situation, or that we're all sort of on the same page as I go through this and make my other points. Starting off the other contributions here this morning, very much around climate, the SDGs, the disasters, and we've heard quite a bit important insights on that. These clearly, in the intersection between water and food, all of these are very relevant and very pertinent. I won't get too deeply into those. I'll touch on where I think they're relevant, but I think my colleagues have really addressed those already. I think one of the things I want to emphasize just to start with is about context, because I think this is something that as we go through this process that with the UN Water Conference and the other conferences, context is something that's, I wouldn't say is easy to ignore, but it's certainly something that we need to try and appreciate from the level we're looking at this issue and challenge. Each farm, each water reality in that situation, in a water and food setting, is quite unique. And this really varies across the state here in Nebraska, but also in some of the countries we're working in, Rwanda and Brazil. It all varies between one farm and the next. This includes the scale, the climate, the agroecosystem, the value chain, access to finance, as our previous speaker was just talking about, and then the productivity on that. When Yogita was talking about the productivity in parts of Niger, how do we actually get that productivity to a level that the farm situation is sustainable, and more importantly in this context is use our water resources judiciously. So water for agriculture, when I talk about this, I'm talking about a continuum of water availability. So it's from very unpredictable rainfall that in certain situations to very reliable rainfall in parts of the world where we don't need irrigation, through to full irrigation. It's a complete continuum of where water is being used. And this is certainly then fits in with the broader water resources, because even in the rain-fed systems, they're part of the watershed to our other uses of water resources. And then on top of that, we consider the droughts and the floods and other shocks to that. Again, we've touched on that. It is a real challenge to appreciate this complexity at a global scale, but I think this is something we have to keep reminding ourselves, particularly with agriculture and food systems. Decisions in agriculture impact water security, both on the quantity and the quality side, and decisions in water impact food security. They are very closely interrelated, and of course, these other aspects then impact that. Next slide, please. So with this in mind, as I was reflecting on how to really look at this, and I'm very glad that it's been brought up that really a lot of this is to really focus on the process and how we change the process. And fortunately, the UN Water Conference is this really nice slide showing this sort of process in terms of the engagement with key events. And what was striking one of the things we do as an institute, and I've done in the past, is we engage in the water events to really better explain and put water and agriculture into those events. And then we engage in agriculture and food events to try and get water better understood and managed in agricultural events. And I feel this is really an important part of the UN Water Conference, but there's other pieces that lead into this. And in this figure, the World Water Forum in Dakar was mentioned, and that was there was quite an important component of water and food in the Dakar Forum. It was somewhat fragmented, and the key messages coming out of that, how that feeds into the UN water system, is still a little unclear, but certainly there was a lot of important progress made in that event. Stockholm Water Week was just this past September. And again, this is a conference where many of our water colleagues meet. Agriculture tends
until 7.
Agriculture tends to have a a lower profile in that event, and it's all, getting agriculture and food explained and presented there is a bit of a challenge. But actually this year we saw quite a bit of progress. I think partly because of the food security issues exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, but also for other reasons, that food security is certainly was higher on the agenda, and that was very encouraging. And we, in one of the side events we had, new partners from the agricultural sector who'd participated in Stockholm found it quite an important event to think through how they could better engage between water and agriculture. Aaron already mentioned the water component in COP27, and that I didn't participate myself. I followed along, but what again there certainly that this doesn't make it into the language in the final output from the COP27. This is certainly making progress with the water pavilion. But then, as I'll say in my next slide, this also translates over into agriculture. So certainly there's important opportunities there to bring this up. Can we go back one slide, please? Yeah, thank you. I want to make a point to the World Water Forum in Bali. So this is now the follow-on from the Senegal event. What is encouraging there is the host country, Indonesia, has been quite explicit about making water and food a higher priority in the World Water Forum, even to the presidential level. So this is certainly an encouraging development in that area to really bring the messages through on how to handle this complexity in water and agriculture. I think an important point to remember here is in the water side, often in the water discussions, we identify agriculture as very significant and important. We dwell on the 70% of the fresh water going to agriculture, but then it's sort of looked upon as a potential area we can take water away from. And really, if we dig into the concept of consumptive use in many of those basins, really saving water in those basins to transfer to other uses does mean then downsizing the agriculture. Next slide, please. So, can you go back one, please? So I don't have a nice figure from the UN Food System Summit. What I did want to do here, and one of the things is basically there's also equivalent of these other conferences and events going on that actually feed, and many areas do try to feed into the things like the Food System Summit. Many of the same partners are engaging in this, that develop messaging and develop ideas that we can take into these larger UN global summits. The World Food Prize, one in the Borlaug Dialogue that's held in Iowa every year, is an important gathering of the agricultural side, the food security people from around the world. The Agri-Food System Forum that AGRA has hosted is an important one that very much brings in the African messaging into all of this. I think it's helped there that Agnes Kalibata was, who's the CEO of AGRA, but also chaired the UN Food System Summit, helped really bring in the agriculture piece, but in terms of water getting into the food part, I'll come back to that. And then again, COP27, the Food System Pavilion, again, progress made there. I think equally, did that make the final language? Not as many would have expected and hoped, but also there, how do we integrate the food and the water piece together? And again, some of the same participants that were involved in the food side and the water side did come together around that in the COP. Next slide, please. Finally, just as I reflected on where the water and food platforms are, where do we really intentionally try to bring these pieces together? And this, again, I caution that any of these, I'm not giving a complete list of them. There's the upcoming global framework on water scarcity in agriculture. This is a network that's been developed by FAO with a number of us participate on. The second international forum is being held in Cabo Verde in February. And this is really bringing a lot of the partners together around this global framework on water scarcity in agriculture, taking these ideas and concepts forward to also feed into the likes of the UN Water Conference. And then just as a pitch for what we're working on, we typically have held a Water for Food Global Conference usually in Lincoln, but sometimes elsewhere. But this our first in-person one for the next for the last 3 years is coming up here in May. And if you're particularly interested in either in this topic, certainly the global framework on water scarcity in agriculture is an area where we are trying to integrate these things together and do this at an event here in Lincoln this coming spring. Next slide, please. So after the UN Food System Summit, we held, and in mind that the COP27 was coming up, we held a webinar to bring together the water food folks who were participating in the UN Food System Summit. We took advantage of it being a virtual world at that time and really looked at what was involved in the conference. How did water get presented in the UN Food System Summit? And again, I think this is it's also a reflection in some ways with the whole water system summit, but it was an important event. It was at 30,000 feet. What we heard back from our partners and colleagues in this panel and elsewhere, farmers and producers were included late into the process. So getting back to Aaron's earlier point about the stewards of the water, the managers on the land, but also the water resources managers, getting those people who really understand the realities in the given contexts, came into the process, but rather late, and that was one of the key messages that come out from our partners. Food security is certainly receiving more attention now. I think it's more to do with global events, but whether the UNF Food System Summit had an impact on this, I'm not sure. In the Water Summit, I think there's important efforts to integrate water into the food system deliberation. There's broad recognition in the water sector that the food system transformation in the Food System Summit, there's a broad recognition that food system transformation must consider water. So there's an understanding, it's accepted, but then when it comes out of the summit, the messaging coming out of the Food System Summit doesn't really pick up on this. The final closing comments mention water resources, but in terms of how do we get water, how do we really recognize the reality of what it means to water and how water has to be better managed to meet the food system targets is not clear. So the key messages really are, we really need to do a lot more to share this vision, to understand this complexity, but really to where the opportunities are in the agricultural sector and with water. The solutions, whether the policies, technologies, and practices, are often very much top-down. And we have to be cautious when we're doing this with these global events, that solutions need to be contextualized. And again, I'm preaching to the choir here in many ways, but it's certainly something that we need to pay attention to. Next slide, please. I left these in. These were the questions that Felix presented us to consider at the end. And I just want to reinforce this. It is a process. As what I was trying to demonstrate here is there's a lot going on. Water and agriculture water and food need to be better integrated into the deliberations in the Water Summit, and to do that, there are a number of partners working at different levels on this, but more needs to be done to take this forward. Thank you.